Over 2,000 years ago, two ancient superpowers clashed in a series of devastating conflicts known as the Punic Wars. These wars lasted for over a century, forever changing the Mediterranean region and shaping the Western world as we know it. On one side was Rome, a burgeoning republic on the Italian peninsula, known for its disciplined military, ambitious leaders, and driven by a desire to secure and expand its territory. On the other side was Carthage, situated in modern-day Tunisia in the northern coast of Africa. Founded by Phoenician settlers, Carthage had grown into a flourishing maritime power with extensive trade networks and prosperous colonies stretching right across the Mediterranean. These two civilizations, though initially not direct competitors, began to cross paths in the 3rd century BC. Their interests collided on the island of Sicily, a strategic and fertile land situated between both powers. Rome, initially content with dominance over the Italian peninsula, couldn't ignore the allure of Sicily. Carthage, too, viewed control over Sicily as crucial to protecting its trade routes and strategic dominance. Disputes over Sicily, fueled by diplomatic disagreements and territorial claims, gradually began to escalate. In 264 BC, conflict over the control of Sicily provided the spark that ignited the war. It all started when the Mamertines, the name of a group of Italian mercenaries, seized the Sicilian city of Messana. They received a threat of war from a more powerful Sicilian city, called Syracuse. In panic, the Mamertines looked around for military support. Intriguingly, both Rome and Carthage were asked for aid. Both powers saw strategic value in assisting. Rome, fearful of Carthaginian control over Sicily, decided to intervene first. In retaliation, Carthage also sent troops. Soon the two sides were at war with each other, and the Mamertines were quickly forgotten. The First Punic War was initially marked by a series of land battles. Early in the war, Rome suffered on the seas, unprepared to face Carthage's superior naval power. The Battle of Agrigentum in 262 BC was the first major land battle of the First Punic War. The Romans, in a show of strength, laid siege to the Carthaginian-held city. The stakes were high, and Carthage was determined to break the Roman grip. It was a grueling siege, lasting several months. In a final attempt to lift the siege, the Carthaginians launched a full-scale assault on the Roman camp. But the Romans repelled the attack and stormed the city, forcing the Carthaginians to flee, handing Rome its first major victory. Turning their attention to the sea, Rome aimed to disrupt Carthage's naval superiority. They copied Carthaginian ship designs and built their own fleets. The subsequent naval battles of Mylae, Sulci, Tyndaris, and Ecnomus between 260–256 BC were grand spectacles of maritime warfare. Rome's shipbuilders had created a secret weapon called the corvus. It was a boarding bridge installed on the Roman ships that could be used to turn sea battles into infantry battles. This new invention played a decisive role in these encounters. At Ecnomus, one of the largest naval battles in history, involving almost 700 ships, the use of the corvus helped Rome secure a resounding victory, shifting the balance of naval power in Rome's favor. The culminating battle of the First Punic War was the siege of the Sicilian city of Lilybaeum, which occurred between 250 and 241 BC. Lilybaeum was the last stronghold of Carthage in Sicily. Despite a long and grueling siege, Rome couldn't penetrate the city's formidable defenses. In an effort to break the siege, Carthage sent their last fleet to the city. Rome decided to intercept these naval forces, leading to the Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 BC. Against all odds, the Romans emerged victorious. Deprived of supplies and reinforcements, Carthage was forced to negotiate peace. After 23 long years, the war ended. In the resulting peace treaty, Carthage surrendered Sicily to Rome and had to pay a large monetary fine. With the end of the First Punic War, Rome emerged as a formidable power in the Mediterranean. However, the peace was uneasy, and tensions would soon flare up again. However, the aftermath of the First Punic War left Carthage in a state of vulnerability. Weakened and having to pay a large indemnity to Rome, Carthage faced a new crisis when unpaid mercenaries, who had been instrumental in the previous war, revolted. This is known as the Mercenary War, or the Truceless War, a conflict that further drained Carthaginian finances. While Carthage would ultimately win this war, it would take several years and use much of their remaining resources to do so. While Carthage was consumed with the Mercenary War, Rome seized this opportunity to seize control of the Carthaginian islands of Sardinia and Corsica. This act was perceived by Carthage as a breach of the peace treaty and a hostile move, escalating tensions between the two powers. Once the Mercenary War was finished, Carthage sought new sources of money to help rebuild their empire. They sent one of the most experienced generals, Hamilcar Barca, with an army to the Iberian Peninsula, which is modern Spain, where lots of silver could be found. Hamilcar focused on expanding Carthaginian control of Spain and rebuilding their military strength. This period saw the rise of one of history's most iconic generals, Hannibal Barca, the son of Hamilcar. Instructed by his dad, Hannibal was raised with an intense hatred for Rome and was groomed to be a military leader. After his father's death, Hannibal led successful campaigns in Spain, not only increasing Carthaginian resources, but also posing a growing threat to Rome. His daring tactics and leadership skills would soon be put to the ultimate test. In 218 BC, rising tensions between Rome and Carthage ignited once again, this time leading to the Second Punic War, a conflict that would feature one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. The immediate trigger of the Second Punic War was the siege of Saguntum, a city in Spain allied with Rome, but in the sphere of Carthaginian influence. Its capture by Hannibal Barca signaled the start of open hostilities. The Second Punic War had begun. After the fall of Saguntum, Hannibal decided to bring the war to Rome. He took a daring path, marching his army from Spain through France and crossing the dangerous Italian Alps. His vast army, which included war elephants, suffered heavy losses in the snow and high altitude of the mountains, but emerged as a united fighting force. The sudden arrival of Hannibal's army in northern Italy took Rome by surprise, and they hastily sent their armies north to engage him. At the Battle of Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, Hannibal set an ambush. The Romans walked straight into his trap, and the Carthaginians slaughtered the entire Roman army. Facing Hannibal's onslaught, Rome adopted the Fabian Strategy, which meant that they avoided major battles and focused on disrupting Hannibal's supply lines instead. However, the Romans became impatient with this approach and sent out another army to snatch a quick victory against Hannibal. This led to the infamous Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. Even though the Roman forces were larger, they underestimated the genius of Hannibal. The Carthaginian commander arrayed his smaller army in a crescent formation, which meant that he was able to surround the Romans. Pressed from all sides, it was another mass slaughter. This victory was a masterpiece of tactics and one of the most significant in military history. Yet even in victory, Hannibal's strategic limitations emerged. He couldn't seize the city of Rome itself and had to remain in Italy, waiting for the Romans to surrender. One young Roman general, Scipio Africanus, who was lucky to have survived Cannae, studied Hannibal's tactics. He decided to turn the tide of the war by taking the fight to Carthage's home territories in Africa. In 202 BC, the decisive Battle of Zama marked the end of the Second Punic War. Hannibal, for the first time, was defeated on the battlefield by Scipio, forcing Carthage to sue for peace. The terms of peace were harsher this time. Carthage lost all its overseas territories, had its navy limited, and was prohibited from waging war without Rome's permission. The conclusion of the Second Punic War left Rome in a position of strength in the Mediterranean, while Carthage, once a formidable power, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. During this period, Rome further solidified its control over the Mediterranean, annexing territories and establishing its influence over kingdoms in the east. Rome, sensing no immediate threat from Carthage, turned its attention towards other potential rivals. Carthage, on the other hand, struggled to recover from the losses of the Second Punic War. Despite these challenges, Carthage managed to pay off its war indemnity and sought to restore some of its former prosperity. However, Carthage's recovery alarmed Rome, fearing a resurgence of their old rival. In 150 BC, Carthage clashed with Numidia, a Roman ally in northern Africa, over territorial disputes. Rome saw this as a breach of the peace treaty. The scene was set for a final confrontation. Rome was poised to deliver a finishing blow to its age-old adversary. In 149 BC, Rome declared war. Unlike the previous Punic Wars, the third was primarily a protracted siege of Carthage itself. Carthaginians, determined to resist, turned their city into a fortress, leading to a brutal and drawn-out conflict. Despite facing starvation and overwhelming odds, the Carthaginians resisted fiercely, displaying a resilience that surprised the Romans. The final assault came in 146 BC, led by the Roman general Scipio Aemelianus, who was the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus. The Romans broke through the city walls, and the soldiers were given open permission to slaughter anyone they found and destroy everything they saw. The city was set alight and burned for days. Carthage was in ruins. Its remaining walls were torn down, and the last survivors were sold into slavery. Carthage's last territories were taken by Rome and turned into the province of Africa. With Carthage obliterated, Rome stood unchallenged as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Over a century of conflict between Rome and Carthage saw Rome gain immense wealth from the spoils of war and control over key trade routes. The Punic Wars also had a profound cultural impact. Rome, once a recipient of cultural influences from Carthage and the Greek world, started influencing these cultures with its own. The legendary figures and events from these wars are still immortalized in art, literature, and popular culture. Ultimately, the Punic Wars marked the rise of Rome as a genuine superpower in the ancient world. Within a century and a half, it would become known as the Roman Empire.